For today, we're going to be working questions 25 through 28. We're going to start combining. We're going to combine our functions, right? Yesterday, we learned how to evaluate them, but I gave you guys just one function per question. Sometimes I gave you guys just the equation. Sometimes I gave you guys a graph. Now we're going to combine them. So 25 through 28. Looking at question 25, notice I gave you guys a function h and a function g. And here on the question, I'm asking for h minus g of 0. So that's how we're going to read this. Find h minus g of 0. Okay, so what does that actually mean? The way we're going to write this, I'm going to go h of 0 minus g of 0. That 0 is going to be used for both functions h and g. Because I had a minus in between h and g, notice I went h of 0 minus g of 0. So whatever operations is between the letters, that's the one I'm going to use. I'm going to use minus. So it would be nice if I knew what h of 0 and g of 0 are. So let me find that out. H of 0. So I'm looking at the function h. And the value of the x, the value of the variable, is going to be 0. So I have 4 times 0 minus 1, which is 0 minus 1, right? Because 4 times 0 is 0. So 0 minus 1 equal to negative 1. It would be nice if I also knew what g of 0 are. So g, I'm looking at the function g. The value of the variable, the value of x in this case is going to be 0. So I have 0 squared minus 4. I know 0 squared is 0, so I have 0 minus 4, which is equivalent to negative 4. So h of 0 is negative 1, g of 0 is negative 4. So coming back to the question, notice at the very bottom I have h of 0 minus g of 0. So let me write this as a negative 1 minus a negative 4. Let's remember that when we have two negative signs put together, we change it to a plus sign. So let me emphasize this. Let me change to red. These two negative signs become a plus sign. So negative 1 plus 4. Right? A negative 1, a positive 4. Remember that in addition, when they have different signs, we subtract, keep the sign of the larger one. So negative 1 plus 4 is going to equal to positive 3. Okay, not that bad. Let's take a look at number 26. I want you to find g plus f of negative 9. So I'm going to find g of negative 9, and I'm going to add it to f of negative 9. Right now, in this case, I'm doing addition because there's a plus sign between the g and the f. So it would be nice if I knew what g of negative 9 and f of negative 9 are. So let me find g of negative 9. Just looking at the function g, the variable, in this case x, well, x equals negative 9. So I have negative 4 times a negative 9 minus 1. I know I have to do multiplication before I subtract. Negative 4 times a negative 9 is positive 36 minus 1, which is 35. So g of negative 9 is 35. Let me find out what f of negative 9 is. I'm going to go 3 times negative 9 minus 3. I have to multiply first. I know 3 times a negative 9 is negative 27 minus 3. Now, negative 27 minus 3 is negative 30. So let's see. I have to do g of negative 9 plus f of negative 9. So I have to do 35 plus a negative 30. All right, when I'm adding a positive and a negative, I subtract the numbers and keep the sign of the large one. So this is going to give me positive 5. All right, let's take a look at question number 27. I want you to do g times h of 2. That little dot in between g and h is going to represent times. So I have to do g of 2 times h of 2. So let me find out what g of 2 is first. So I'm looking at the function g of 2. So the variable, again, sometimes most of the time the variable is x, but sometimes it is a different letter. Sometimes I also use the letter n or something else. So the variable, I know the variable is the letter in between the parentheses. So that's what I'm saying, the variable is x. So g of 2, let me go as 4 times 2 minus 2, better known as 8 minus 2, which is equal to 6. So g of 2 is 6. Notice I multiply before I subtracted. I also have to find out what's h of 2. H of 2 is going to do 4 times 2 minus 3. I know 4 times 2 is 8, so I have 8 minus 3, which is better known as 5. So g of 2 times h of 2, I'm looking at 6 times 5. 6 times 5 is 30. Now let's take a look at the last example. Now fractions, I'm asking you to find g over h of negative 3. In reality, what I'm asking here is what's g of negative 3 divided by h of negative 3. Fractions are another way we write division. Or to sound fancy, we call this quotient. Remember that a few years ago? Quotient, division. So let me find out what's g of negative 3. The variable is negative 3. So let me write this as a negative. Notice how the negative at the very beginning has nothing to do with the x to the third. Then I have let me put negative 3 to the third. Because remember my variable is negative 3 minus, and then let me put this as negative 3 squared. I put the negatives inside parentheses. And the reason why, because exponent has to do with the parentheses first. The negative sign at the beginning has nothing to do with my exponent. So there's a negative sign at the very beginning. Negative 3 to the third is negative 27. Then I have minus 9. Negative 3 squared gave me positive 9. Interesting part is that at the very beginning of my question here, I have two negative signs. So that's going to change to a positive sign. So positive 27 minus 9, I'm just going to call that 18. Now let me do h of negative 3. I have 4 times a negative 3 minus 5. So that gives me negative 12 minus 5, which is equal to negative 17. So g of negative 3 divided by h of negative 3, I'm basically looking at 18 divided by negative 17. All right, now if I type this in, it's going to give me a decimal, right? If I type it in my calculator, it's going to give me a decimal. Now, let me write this, my answer, let me write it as a fraction. I see a negative sign, right? Positive divided by negative. So I'm going to have a fraction, and then I'm going to have the negative sign in front of the fraction. When there's a negative sign, whether it's the first number or the second number, just bring it to the front. And I'm going to have 18 over 17. So negative 18 over 17. I'm not going to type in the whole decimal that I get. Now, if your fraction can be simplified, then simplify it. What I mean with that is that if you have 10 over 6, don't write it as 10 over 6. Instead, call it 5 over 3. Right? Simplify your fraction. Now, how do we type our fractions? I'm just going to go the negative at the front, 18th over 17th. Notice I use the backslash. All right, let me zoom out so we can see what we did today.